had a BM, that's good.
Huh? Yeah, you've been helping on this. And is this yours? Is that yours? Why, you got two? Oh, no, that's okay. Hey, you guys don't have buttons, though. You need buttons to push, right?
I know why I'm stuck here, and I don't like it. We all get our own little earphones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, yeah.
You related to Charles?
You know, Chris, if you get two more people up here,
Found
there'll be more
Tufts
people here than
University.
there.
Yeah, we were saying we should just move this table back there, you know?
My alma mater. And my wife's. And our
We have
daughter's
audiology, psychology, neuromuscular standards, musicians. I'll call you the musician representative. Coordinating group, the audiology, okay.
Go for it. Well, I think you're right. Yeah, this is
Susan Hammond. She said she's 20 minutes. We're just waiting on Dr. Hammond. She said she'll be right down, and then we'll begin our afternoon session. As you can see, we have up here at the head table representatives from the various stakeholder groups. Some of the chairs have left, but we have replacements in lieu of those people, and have our respected charged tasked persons here, and including, in addition to this particular group, we have a coordinating group, and then we also have a person that you probably haven't heard from or met yet, and this is Chris Sider. And Chris is a local musician and trombone player that I've known for a long time and have the great privilege to perform with him many times. I used to play in a church band regularly, and he brings the perception of all of this, the perspective from the musician standpoint, which I think has been very valuable as we've been proceeding here. Just somebody out there who's a musician, but he's also a professional writer and makes his living writing and dealing with words. So he's had his 2 cents in terms of how we've been phrasing things, and it's going to be a great opportunity for us to have his contributions. There's Dr. Hammond. We need one more chair. It's okay. She went shopping. Well, let me thank you and once again for participating this weekend and sticking around to the tail end of this. If you're anything like me, you're curious about all those wonderful cars that are sitting out in the parking lot in the mornings and what's going on across the street over here at the Motor Speedway. And I have attended a few of those things, and I've been thinking about it as well. And I wonder if I was at a conference and that was going on, then I might not slip over there and take a peek. But anyway, I appreciate you being here and participating in this wrap-up session. Behind the activity ongoing here for the last 3 days has been quite an intense dialogue and consideration of all that's been going on, including the analysis and discussion of comments and questions and concerns that have been passed back to the group. Dr. Kondrowski has been organizing those, tabulating them, and characterizing them based on issues, and has developed a scheme to put them into different envelopes depending on what issues they're dealing with, and we've been talking about them. We're certainly not going to try to go through the list of concerns or questions at this point in time. We're going to try to get to the biggest issue first and see if we can get some agreement. And then if we can, describe what we're going to intend to do here in the near future in response to this particular exercise. So at first, I'd like to have a slide, if you would. What's that? Good, thank you. About 4 years ago, I was privileged to be on the faculty of the School of Public Health at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. That was just due to the fact that there was an opportunity for funding for me to continue the work that I was doing. But it was a great opportunity to be exposed to the field of public health in general and to interact with, on a daily basis, faculty in the School of Public Health, epidemiologists and health promotion specialists and so on and so forth. And I've come to appreciate the great wealth of information from that field's point of view. And over the last 2 years have been rifling through textbooks and traveling across the country, meeting with people who are experts in this area and asking them about, gee, how would we handle such a process like this? And I've come to some assumptions based on those experiences. And this little simple slide is the basis for those assumptions as it reflects the health promotion, health education, theoretical and practical orientations to trying to change a culture. And it basically suggests is as we approach a problem, we have to become aware of the problem. We have to know it exists. If we know it exists, we have to then believe that it's true. We have to accept the reality that it exists. Once we accept its existence, then there's the possibility for change. The doing, the behavioral aspects that would reflect a potential reaction to knowing. And if we think about the great public health initiatives in the last century, things like smoking, for instance. You know, when I was a kid, my parents weren't aware. Nobody told them that when you get into that station wagon and go on a camping trip and travel 8 hours in the car with the windows rolled up and mom and dad smoking cigarettes, that it might have a negative impact on your kids. Right? Or that, mom smoked while she was breastfeeding me. Yeah. Or that, mom was drinking right up till the point that I was born.
I think we have enough of those examples.
We'll have a consult later, Chris.
Hey, this is my turn, George. Well, anyway, as we've become aware of the problem, there was still reluctance to change habits, change behaviors, change labeling of cigarette packages, and so on and so forth, until we knew strong enough, based on evidence or based on enough advocacy towards a particular issue, that we come to believe, yeah, this is true. And if I do this, and there's a potential negative outcome. Another example is the use of seat belts. Gosh, when I was a kid, I hardly ever put on my seatbelt in the car. Now I have 2 little children. I can't imagine them getting into my vehicle without strapping them in, not only with a seatbelt, but with the appropriate size special seat in the appropriate place inside of the vehicle. I believe it. So we're basically somewhere, I believe, as we think about our national posture, schools of music, college music programs, somewhere between knowing and believing. I believe that this body is more towards the belief, and then there's others who are more towards the pre-know, or maybe they know but they don't quite believe. And I'm sensing this based on a lot of interactions with individuals. For instance, this past fall, I was at Michigan State University for the Music Education Instrumental Music Conference up there, which was just wonderful. And the crowd was primarily music education faculty from schools of music across the country who deal specifically with instrumental music ed. And during my presentation, I said, would you raise your hand if you think that when a child walks into a band program, they're at risk for some kind of health problem associated with what they're doing in that band room? And the look I got from that group was astonishing. And they were like, huh? And reluctantly, maybe 25, 30% went, I guess so, if I think about it a little bit. And what came out of that as we followed up with discussions were comments like, gee, nobody ever asked me that. Nobody's mentioned that to me. I never even thought about it. I just graduated with my PhD. I got my new position, and I never talked about that. No professor had introduced that concept to me. So there is some distance, I suppose, culturally between the knowing and the believing. And we want to move firmly into the middle at this point in time, historically. We want to believe. And I feel as though if we believe strong enough, the creative energies and all the resources that we can sense here will be brought to bear on this particular problem as a set of actionable steps, a set of doing. There are many examples here of you already doing things, offering courses, having lecturers, continuing education things. There's a lot of interesting ideas here. But we want to get the country to move into that direction and let the uniqueness, the talents resonate throughout the country and develop into unique and very effective programming, which we can then reevaluate and get better and better. We want to get the train rolling. So as a group, a coordinating group in the back, we thought that we need to establish a statement as a result of this conference that reflects this belief. And that's what we've been working on for the last 24, 48 hours. And if I could have the next slide, this is what we came up with. Now, before we respond, let me make a couple caveats and introduce the idea that we're not suggesting this comment to supplant any existing commentary about what music education or music at the college level is, or why it is, or what promises and what expectations can come from it. This is not to deny all the wonders of music. We have a lot of language that defines that quite eloquently. Yes, it says the HBSM delegates, and based on one of the recent messages sent back, I perhaps should say charter delegates. Thank you, Peggy. So HBM delegates recommend that music schools accept their societal and cultural responsibility to recognize and respond to health risks inherent in the participation in all aspects of music, including educating, learning, performing, and listening. Recommend that music schools accept their societal and cultural responsibility to recognize and respond to health risks inherent in the participation in all aspects of music, including educating, learning, performing, and listening. So before we have some commentary about that, some dialogue which may be necessary, I'm not sure, we'll see. Let's use the audience response system. Quite simply, do you agree or disagree? Save this slide, Andy. Okay, now before we get into maybe dialogue about actual wording, which may be the reason why we have 6% saying no, let's try to think about the essence of this statement as opposed to the particular words used in the statement. Because they're different, and I think we all recognize what those differences are. I think you understand what we're trying to say here. How we say it may be an important thing, and we can talk about that. But first, I really would appreciate if those people who said no, if in fact it wasn't a wording issue, if there's some other issue that you would comment on that, please. Can we put the statement back up, Andy?
It wasn't precisely a wording issue. I didn't get whether we were voting for the idea or the wording. I didn't hear that instruction. So if the instruction is that we're voting for the idea and not necessarily the wording, then I would have voted yes. But so that's different slightly
Yes.
from a wording issue. I just didn't know what we actually were voting on.
Okay. Yes, Hildegard?
I chickened out, I didn't vote, but I would probably have voted for no for the reason that in the statement of the MENC presentation earlier, the focus on balance was very important to me. And I don't see balance in here. I think you're close to it. And I don't know the difference between not worrying about words and just with the overall content. So I was uncomfortable enough that I could not quite subscribe to it this way. If there's any way to reflect that we agree that there is a balance between the positive and the negative, and that we have to be aware of the negative, then I would be fully in support.
Yeah. And as I mentioned right before we put this up, this is not intended to supplant any of the eloquent language that's been developed over 150 years regarding music education or music at the college level. We have language with that. This ideal, this belief, partnered with all those things as you feel your local institution or an organization wants to package this up and express itself. If it has the essence of this inherent in it, it's going to provide that balance. It's not to say this is somehow void of all the recognition of the beauty and wonder and values inherent in music, listening, making, learning, and teaching. Not at all. But it's just to point out that we believe that there is a responsibility to recognize and deal with these issues. That's what this statement is saying. Anyone else? Sure. Pardon? Yeah, okay. Well, before we do that, why don't we get a sense of any issues with the wording? So, Pamela, please use the mic just so we can capture this.
I think the last phrase is syntactically a little muddled. I sat there trying to figure out what it meant, and I think you probably want to take all of those words, the educating, learning, performing, and listening words, and put them before the word music in order to make a sentence in which you say that we recognize and respond to the health risks inherent in all aspects of educating music, learning music, performing music, and listening to music.
Yeah, that's a good commentary. Yes, John.
As I listen to you talking about the sentence, Chris, you use the word issues a lot rather than risks. And some of us over here were talking about that perhaps, especially with Alice Brentford-Ramirez's comments yesterday, health concerns, health issues might be a better word than the word risk. Some people, I think, have a little problem with the word risk.
Okay.
I'd be interested in hearing about the discussion within the coordinating group that led to the particular adjectives of a societal and cultural responsibility as opposed to other possible adjectives that you might have used.
Well, I'd certainly offer that opportunity to the people at the table here, but if you wouldn't mind, I'll respond to that. I think that society in large has a misconception or an indifference to the realities that we're talking about here. Even children who don't go into a music class or a band program are suspect or are under suspicion to some of these risks. For instance, one of the priorities within the National Institutes of Health hearing group is to educate children about noise-induced hearing loss. It's a societal issue. We live in a culture that emanates greater and greater sound levels, and it introduces those sound levels to children at younger and younger ages. And we're societally more prone to the risks associated with that. And I think we have somewhat of a societal obligation. And culture is referring to me anyway back to who we are, our culture, and the culture of the United States, but the culture of the schools of music. We have a cultural responsibility. How do we fit into the society? What do we do? Why are we there? You know, sort of as maybe intracultural or extracultural. I think a society more in a large point of view, and then the culture more defining what we are. But I'd like to have the rest comment on that too.
Well, one option, I guess that's not, maybe it is. One option that we considered was no adjectives. You just take a look at that, okay? Okay. So, and then we all really ended up agreeing after discussing things that, you know, those words, societal and cultural, are kind of, when you look up in the dictionary, they usually have the good part of the word in the definition. And in a given context, I think we understand what they mean. I'm wondering if Dr. Scott may have thought there might have been some misinterpretation or ambiguity associated with one or more of those.
I certainly don't want to make the statement any longer, but one other adjective that I thought about was institutional responsibility. And I think it's one thing to fix society and our culture as a whole, but I think we may need to start at home and fix things within our own institutions.
We have the intent to try to be as broad as possible. So if we're committing to this societal responsibility, that includes the institutions. If we include, when we talk to David Circle, who's left, if we include those types of words, we're including what happens in public schools. We're trying to be all inclusive. But yeah, I agree with that, Ralph, as well. Yes.
My issue is not with adjectives, it's more with the verbs. And if this is a call to action, which I'm assuming that the statement is intended to be, instead of using softer verbs like recognize and respond, I'm wondering if you want something stronger like identify and commit time and resources to reducing injuries. But that's all.
Again, we were trying to be as encompassing as possible, because the doing can take so many forms, as we've heard this weekend. It could be by virtue of allocating resources. It could be just by virtue of talking to students. It could be a variety of things. It could be, you know, I don't know how many great ideas have come out over the past few days, but just responding would encompass the great majority of those things that were presented, including what you're mentioning.
I'm just a little bit concerned about the negativity, especially, again, I'm a little concerned about the word risks. And so I came up with another wording as well, except there, and if you want to change it to institutional responsibility, to educate all who participate in all aspects of music, including educating, learning, performing, and listening on the varied components of wellness.
My response to that is the assumption inherent in the language doesn't suggest that there is risk. It may imply it to somebody, but it doesn't really suggest that there is risk. If we say we want to make music students healthy, doesn't mean that making music can make you, with a health problem. And we want musicians to be healthier, yeah, so they can be resistant to those risks. And I think that's probably true. If they're more robust in understanding and all that, we're resistant to the risks. Their health promotion is a good thing. But we need to identify the risks. We need to identify that there are risks. And when you just use the promotion word at this level, I think we're missing an opportunity to say, yeah, we recognize and we accept the fact that it is risky. George had a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think in many different areas nowadays, we're seeing, I think, a better understanding of where risk fits into the picture and the notion of risk-benefit. And I think there's not necessarily a negative connotation associated with taking a risk. In fact, I think in many situations there's a positive connotation that's going with this now, that if you want to achieve certain things, that there are well-reasoned, weighed risks that you can take and end up with good results. So I don't have a big negative associated with that. And I also think that the term is so prevalent in everything else that we see that not to include it when we're talking about, I think, similar kinds of issues would be in error.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say one possible way to take some of the sting or negativity out of that would be simply to add a phrase that says, yada, 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 health risks, in addition to the many benefits of. That balances it out.
I guess I would respond to your point, Chris, although I believe it's a good one, with the sense that we may be selling ourselves short with the word risk. And I would draw the analogy to the notion of how we go through life, and we talk about people as people who survive versus people who thrive. And if we address risk, we may fulfill the survival category, and I think that applies particularly well to the noise-induced hearing loss area, that we're not talking about trying to somehow magically improve people's hearing. We're trying to keep them from losing their ability to hear. But when we're looking at, my area, for example, with neuromuscular skeletal, I guess I would like to do more than just keep people from hurting themselves. My dream is that through our understanding of this, that we foster not only the reduction of injury, but that we increase our ability to perform to the highest levels of artistry and comfort that we can achieve. And so that's one of the reasons that, although I voted yes for this, that I think wellness or even hedging and going with issues, as long as risks are understood, that I'd like to see us go beyond that.
To add further to this and maybe muddle the issue a bit more, to add further to this, I think, has a great advantage. However, if we are aiming to add further and going beyond what we have originally set up as a response to the NASM guidelines, then I think we may be over-exceeding what I thought we were here to do.
In what way?
Yes.
Yeah, in what way are we exceeding?
The NASM wants the schools to provide health-related information, pluses and minuses to be sure. I think that if we start going into more aspects of the wellness and the other things that we've been talking about recently now, that we may be exceeding what that guideline was. If we address this directly, then I would agree that risks are, I think, very useful. Issues are good because they can add the positive and the negative, but if they give issues, we have to work indirectly to the risks. But I think most of us here have been dealing with the risks, and I think it would be wise to retain that word.
Yeah, go ahead.
Along the lines of what you're saying, is one of the risks, I think, I may be wrong, but one of the risks of being a music student is that you isolate yourself from some of the general learning experience of a college student, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. A lot of colleges already address the issue of maintaining and promoting your overall health. So do we need to do that too, or do we need to recognize that there is a risk of forgetting about that health promotion information?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if we look at the NASM handbook and mission statements for colleges of music, schools of music around the country, we really don't see as a mission for the School of Music to teach about health in general, to develop curricular activities that promote health. We're in a university that has disciplines and staff and services that do that generally. Is it the role of the College of Music or the School of Music to take on that task for college students just because they're coming to be educated about music in the music school? The music school is there to teach music. They go to the College of Education to take their education classes. They go over to the physical education facilities to get a personal trainer and learn how to lift weights. They don't do that in the College of Music. They go over to the psychology department to take their psychology classes. If it's not about music and the act of listening, performing, and learning and teaching music, it's supplemental to the main mission of the School of Music, isn't it? But when we're talking about issues that are central to the act of those musical characteristics as they relate to health is something that we need to tend to, because what they're doing.
I would respectfully disagree in part for the following reason. We all know that as a matter of general health, it's a good conditioning. You know, you should be going out and getting your cardiovascular workout for however many minutes a day or every other day. But the fact is our music students are not doing that. And as we hear from people like Dr. Branfenbrenner, that's something that specifically related to performance-related injuries acts as a preventative measure, that our music students may need something in addition to what the general students across the college are getting. I don't believe that the music department needs to provide that, and so I would agree with your second comment wholeheartedly. But there may be cases in which simply to say this is a matter of information for the general public may not be enough.
Yeah, and certainly the to-do list recommendations for a music student could include, we recommend that you go over here and do this kind of activity because you're a music student. We recommend that you take advantage of this service. We recommend that you go get your hearing screening. Yeah.
Chris, in the spirit of the word balance that we talked about in the music ed panel, I might suggest that we could use the phrases health risks and wellness issues. That way we address both sides of, we do recognize that there are health risks, but we also realize that there are wellness issues. I know we're making the sentence longer and more complicated, but in the sense of trying to get some kind of balance.
And again, we've been having this discussion here for a while, so we've been responding actually to the comments that you're providing, and we've thought about that. And again, the wellness part of this seems to be, to me anyway, it implies more of a doing. Like, for instance, if we have this basic assumption met at a university and they say, well, our responsibility, our reaction, our doing is to provide a wellness class. We have a wellness track in our curriculum. We have somebody that comes into our school and provides wellness information. Or we have an Alexander Technique person coming in. This is our doing. Why? Because we recognize the risks inherent in music making. So trying to parse out the basic assumption from the acts in responding to the assumption is an important way to think about this. Because if we put in wellness, then the assumption is that everybody has to have a wellness program. My school primarily does research in this area. We don't really have a wellness program. We have a graduate program and people get an academic look at performing arts medicine. Are we responding and responsible? In some ways, but it's unique to us. And perhaps we need to have a wellness program, but I think because we're responding in our unique way, we're satisfying the basic assumption that there is risk and we're doing something about it.
The first two words of the quote are health promotion, just to point that out. And then secondly, I realize that risks seems to be loaded for a group of people in the audience. However, I appreciate hearing the informed position that you've offered us for why the word is in there. A word that may be a little more neutral, but maybe too neutralized would be conditions, health conditions.
My first comment is that in sort of the prevention literature, which I use in a regular way, they talk about risk factors and protective factors. And I think when I look at the word health promotion and when I think about ways in which to promote, I think about both what are the risk factors and what are the protective factors. And some of what I'm not sure even within the mental health working group that I was part of, I'm not sure if we did as well to balance the risk and protective factors. I hadn't really thought about that until now, so part of me is curious for us to go back and look at that. But I did hear some of both within this conference, and I, just like someone was saying before about the word stress and how it can be used and overused, I think wellness, in a way, we're getting caught up in some words, but I think the balance comes to the risk and the protective factors and trying to think about incorporating both of those. And in prevention and intervention literature, you do universal studies which look at how to universally protect and look at risk factors for the entire population, and then selective, which are the high risk, and then indicated, which are the people who are already experiencing problems, so the people who are already having difficulty. And I think looking in a broader way at this, and I guess so I guess that's my first comment. My second comment, and I often sometimes feel like I'm the group psychologist person standing up here, but I guess I feel like it's still early in the day for me here with this consensus building. And some of my concern about the discussion, which I felt a little bit hesitant to say, but I was sort of sitting at my table with this brewing, which is that it feels like we have different investments as we look at this statement, and that some of what I'm hearing is conflict, which is great. I mean, that's what group discussion is about conflict and being able to have different perspectives. But some of my concern is that if any one of us gets too invested in this at this early point in the process, that we're going to start to get polarized. And I guess part of me was sitting there feeling concerned that the discussion may start to get polarized as we get too invested. So at risk of offending people, I guess I felt like I needed to say that I was starting to feel uncomfortable with some of the process of what was happening.
Yeah. Mark?
I'm Mark Ross. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm coming from a background from medical education, so I've had to educate myself here in the music education side, but after a conversation with many different stakeholders here, I've recognized that you, as music educators, face a lot of the problems that we do, that the curriculum is so packed, and that to realistically put our ideas into a curriculum, we have to have really a minimum requirement that really captures the essence of the problem. So I think that's what we tried to do with risk. We tried to look at the bottom line. If we get too complicated and talk about risk and wellness and programs, that's not realistic to have this introduced into a busy curriculum. So we need to be able to have something general enough that is all-inclusive of all our great ideas about, not only training the medical students, but also training the trainers of the medical students and doing research and training students who are younger than a college age. And that's what we really tried to do here. And at the same time, we want to leave enough flexibility where we hit our key issues of what we talk here and give schools the flexibility to incorporate what our bottom line is into their own program depending on their resources, and to make this realistic and to really have a minimum standard of the essence of what we want to get out of this.
I have a question. Is Dr. Meineke still here? Oh, that's what I thought that was you. Okay. I have a question about the wording in that, having worn the Associate Dean hat for a while, and my husband is in aircraft, so he does certification all the time. The biggest problem I have with the word risk and responsibility in the same sentence is that it implies litigation. And my question is there not a difference between accepting responsibility for risk in a situation in an industry versus promoting health and safety? We talk about promotion as being, but to me, promoting health and safety is a different. You're doing things that you can try to do on the front end, but that's a little different than accepting responsibility for risk. And that's the language that I'm having a problem with, and it may be because of my background, but I wondered if you would weigh in on this a little bit.
I don't really think the statement says that we're asking them to accept responsibility for risk. We're asking them to accept responsibility for recognizing that there might be a risk. Any such language can be risky, but the word risk comes from the current handbook. That's what's in the current handbook in that one sentence. Professional health risks. So it's not so much that everybody here, the people, and I wasn't involved, who put this statement together, came up with that word. It's that it was handed to them by the organization. And I think the discussion here is good, though. I think there are ways to take the sting out of the word and make it a little less obnoxious, if you will, to those people. I mean, clearly the group is dividing now into two groups. People that say, well, our biggest concern is that some of the things we have our students do is in fact risky. And other groups say, yes, but most of the students who have problems are having problems that are general health problems, and they affect what we're doing in the medical school. And everybody wants both of those to be able to combine into the statement, and that's what we're doing right now.
I guess the other thing I would say is that you don't have to take a lot of action to respond to risks. I mean, you just do the minimum. That's a little bit different than promoting health and safety. That, to me, promoting something is an action that implies we're going to learn, we're going to present information, we're going to do whatever. If I'm thinking about my School of Music and I'm thinking of the art department, if I'm going to avoid risk, then all I'm going to do is just do the minimum in terms of providing the appropriate places to deposit chemical materials, whatever. That's completely different than teaching or than in promoting health and safety.
Can I respond? I understand what you're saying, but again, as Mark said, we're looking for a minimum standard here because it's going to come down from the top. And I agree with the idea that the actual changes need to come from beneath, from the instructors themselves. But maybe having that inducement, if you say to your educators, if we don't do something about this, we're in danger of losing our accreditation. Then, I'm sorry about it too, but we got to do something. Then you might get the ball rolling, because then you can say, you tell me what you think would be best, and the organization that's doing the accreditation will see that you're making an honest effort, and you'll probably be accredited.
The first slide was the know, believe, and do. And some of the teaching health promotion information, in addition to teaching them how to prevent risky or not participate in risky behavior, I believe is part of the do part of that
Right.
triad. So we're not saying don't address health promotion, or I'm not, but the belief part is.
Yeah, all the actionable steps that we can conceptualize, whether it's developing a health and safety program, whatever they are, they're actionable steps. That's the doing in response to the belief that there are risks.
Some of the discussion about risk versus issues and some of the other things actually led me back to my first question, again, about the adjectives. And Ralph's comment was very helpful in helping me frame the question. We are really responding in the conference to the NASM guideline, which is directed to what we do for our students in music schools. And the responsibility that we're describing here, when my question was answered, speaks about our responsibility to society and a broad cultural responsibility. The idea of an institutional responsibility, as Ralph mentioned, ties it more to our students and to the institutional culture. I'm still not terribly troubled by the words, but I think that there is some ambiguity as to whether the responsibility is to the outer world or to the culture of the music school and how we're dealing with students themselves. In that regard, Catherine's comments about surviving versus thriving, I think is very relevant, and risk does limit the discussion to the surviving. And I might want to put forward for consideration substituting health concerns, because one can be concerned for health above a baseline level, and one can be concerned, of course, about risk. So I would offer the opportunity to consider health concerns inherent. And it might be minor wordsmithing, but inherent in various aspects of music participation. Might be a little less alarming in language, rather, participation in all aspects of music. That's just a suggestion, since I've heard some concern about how alarmist the statement might be.
Hi, as a representative of the American Music Therapy Association, I feel a responsibility to include the idea of health risks and benefits. And that's something I don't feel is, we've had enough time to bring into this meeting, that there's a whole area. We have over 4,000 music therapists who are trained at NASM schools. So I just would really like that to somehow appear in this statement. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a widespread phenomena. And in fact, it's a cultural and societal phenomena that we can see in every bookstore. There's books telling you how wonderful music is and what it can do for you at all levels. And if we read the music education literature, it's just full of the same kind of arguments and eloquent discussions. That's not missing, right? Our philosophy of music education is that music is great and wonderful, and those discussions are articulated to the nth degree and used to promote and advocate music. We're not saying that language shouldn't be part of what we do to describe ourselves as music educators. We're not saying to take that out. We're saying that we want to, as a body, be responsible to acknowledge the risk. That's all we're adding to all that stuff. We're not saying by adding that we're taking something like the value of music therapy out of that dialogue. Not at all.
I think my feeling is I would like to see more integration between the music therapy programs and the music ed programs.
And
I don't see enough of that.
And that's an actionable step. It's the doing is like Berklee College of Music may define their school's mission statement may say that we're focusing on this and this and this because we have music therapy. TWU may do the same thing. University of North Texas may do it differently because they don't have music therapy. Another school may have a big health promotion, physiology connection or something, and they may promote their their school that way. But all the schools, if they adopt this basic principle, will put into the language, in addition to all those discussions, the fact that they recognize risk. And I want to say also, the risk, to me, indifferent to safety and health, implies that there's a difference between, for instance, going into a workplace and doing something and slipping on the floor because the person who mopped the floor didn't dry it correctly. So you have safety and health professionals there. Or if there was the potential for some kind of contagion or something to be released into the air. You know, it's a health issue. Yeah, we got to protect them. We have to have safety procedures. These things are everywhere. There's safety procedures in this building, right? We all need to be safe and protected from these things. But when we're talking about making music and learning music, the actual act of making music, how we make music, is risky. When I play the trumpet, how I play that trumpet, regardless of whether I slip on the floor or the lights are going to something's going to fall on my head because it's not safe. When I play that trumpet, there's something inherent in what I'm doing that's risky to me.
Clarifying question?
Yes.
Because not that long ago, 94% of us did agree with the statement. As we search for consensus this afternoon, are we after 100% consensus? Because 94% was actually pretty darn good. And I don't want to wash over what may be very significant concerns that are raised by an individual that perhaps would change the minds of the rest of the people in the room. But I think we're probably all in agreement that tremendous work has been done even prior to the start of this conference, and that's continued during the conference. And you all have had a lot longer time to wrestle with this language than we have. So I guess it would help me and perhaps the rest of us to know exactly what's the consensus that you're aiming for and how can we all best serve the work that you've already put in.
Good. Well, then we can move forward, yeah. So we'd like to project some version of this in the materials that we generate. And we also would like to move, if you could back up the slide once to that health promotion education slide. What we're intending to do, we've been preparing to do, is to take the content that we've developed here at this conference, which is still developing and will be added to as we move into the next weeks, and do what we've promised the grant people that we would do. And we're going to take on two initiatives. One is to develop something that each school can do as a bare minimum that's come from this group's efforts, that's come from the recommendations of the qualified experts. So we're going to look into that content and package it up in a way that a school, without any cost, any changes in curriculum, any interdisciplinary collaboration, any requisite resources distributed in that direction, other than saying to a student, we want you to look at this. And it may be based on a web or maybe in a pamphlet form, we're not sure yet. We're going to put that stuff into language, study the language as appropriate for the 18, 19-year-old, test it with the students, and get some responses, and then submit it to all the NASM schools for use. Make it available free. In addition to that, we're going to develop an administration's guidebook, if you will, that defines what happened here at this conference in a way that leads to the content areas that we feel are most important to be dealt with based on the group's work, and then recommendations for how these things can be implemented. The model that we're going to use is from Dr. Brodsky's work at UCLA in developing a guidebook for medical schools to incorporate practices of alternative medicine or to educate music students in alternative medicine. It's an excellent program and model for what we intend to do. We've looked at that and feel as though that's a good way to go. So we will move, as a consequence of this effort, over to the do side, put things into the hands of the schools, and take a first step at doing this in addition to what you've already been doing. So that's our intent. So if there's anybody up here that would like to comment and generate any more discussion, please feel free. Otherwise.
Actually, I'm going to make one comment, is that in good conflict resolution manner, maybe the first question ought to be, the first question ought to have read, is there any of you that cannot live with this statement as it is worded? My suspicion is that we'd get everybody can live with it, but I don't know for sure. They want to vote. Can we do that? Can you live with the statement as worded?
Well, I guess.
Is there anybody out there, can you live with this statement as worded, as representative of what happened at this conference? So we're finding out that really, actually, after we've had a few minutes to think about it, that we're not really at 95%. And some people have found issue that's important enough that they now cannot agree with the statement. So that means we got to do a little more discussion. Sorry, people.
Well, I think that we also need to recognize two things. One is that the original question was asked as an ideal. Regardless of the wording, do we believe that this is the essence of what we want to have come out of this conference? And then we had agreement. Then we had a discussion about the wording to that ideal. And there are problems with the wording. And I guess the question is, do we need to discuss those words at this point and try to come to an agreement about the words? I'm seeing shakes of nose and all that kind of stuff now, or leave it to us as a group here to work on those words and maybe disseminate it back out to you and get more comments and just kind of refine it, reflect on it. I think, can we vote on that? I mean, it's not something that's going to, all of a sudden show up tomorrow at everybody's doorstep. This is the final document. I mean, this is part of an ongoing process. I think the concerns have been well articulated and ripe for future thought, but I'm not sure how to move forward from this point. Yeah, okay. Dr. Kondrowski's had a suggestion that maybe we consider that the essence of this is what we want to have stated, and that the way we stated is something that we need to work on. And I think there's an agreement that that's the case. But he also thinks that there's things that we need to discuss in addition to that. So maybe we can just change the subject for a little while and open it up and start with Dr. Kondrowski.
Well, actually, what I was getting at is that, we have a pretty strong consensus even on this. I mean, I think if you look at the group, so that if we go back to the issue of what the essence is, and it looks like we do have some consensus on the essence. We know that there are some issues, and maybe one way to sort of get past some things a little bit, because Chris said he really didn't know which way to go here, would be to just say, let's leave that alone, and then let's just continue to have some discussion on what some of these issues are. And I will maybe kick that off a little bit, because I heard several people bring up the issue of thriving versus striving, okay, which I think is very interesting. And perhaps a good analogy that comes to mind comes from the fact that we're right across the street here from a big NASCAR raceway, okay? And I'm not sure when you guys are driving, whether you're thriving or striving, okay? But let's say that they're out there and they're the ones who are thriving in that realm, okay? But that most of our day-to-day driving is in the what? Surviving. We got all of these. Oh, this is getting bad. okay? But the point being, look at NASCAR. They have constantly improved and brought attention to risks associated with what they do, and they still far exceed what, you know, the average driver does, okay? So I don't think we will have to put dampers on the levels of performance that can be achieved and give up all of safety for that. I mean, the question is, how do we do both together? So I don't think necessarily just because there are risks, you will have to resort to or limit yourself to just, well, you guys decide.
Surviving.
The call to
Surviving?
action,
No.
the
Right.
call to action for this particular thing, as I see, is not very strong. It just says respond to. It leaves it pretty wide open for people to respond to, positively, negatively, whatever. I don't think we're trying to make a law. If we were, we would take a lot longer because you see how long it takes to get anything done in Congress. So I think that sort of leaves it wide open for other people to respond to in other ways.
I think one thing that we're losing sight of is that, as Chris keeps pointing out, there is other language already there. This is not the be-all and the end-all. This is being added to. And maybe it might help to clarify for people if we were able to put up the language that stresses the positives, that creates the balance, that talks about the joys of music making and all. We're not here to celebrate the joys of music. We already know that. We were here to say, in addition to that, there are problems that have been ignored for a long time, and we have some responsibility to address in some way. So perhaps if we could see the balancing language or the positive language so that we were able to visualize the incorporation of this new statement, however it ends up being worded, it would be easier for us to come to some conclusion.
Well, you know, I have a whole shelf of books that would have eloquent language for the health benefits and music therapy aspects of music. I was really involved in that for a while. But this makes me think about the exercise that our College of Music went through recently to develop a 5-year strategic plan and a mission statement. If, for instance, this statement was provided to our university, to our administrator, as a consequence of this problem, or this conference, right before that initiative started, my suspicion is that that mission statement and that strategic plan might have been influenced. And there might have been an effort to incorporate some doing in addition to a basic philosophical belief system that's established in that document. And I think that's the intent. That's what we would hope for, that as schools of music think how to move forward, that there's an additional concern, something that the qualified experts have articulated quite well and have raised issue about, and have suggested that, gee, we need to be aware and responsive to these issues. And then the strategic plan gets developed. And hey, we need to work on this, and we need to work on that, and we need to work on that. And wow, and I can't remember, maybe Dr. Scott can help remind me, but I think it took over a year just to work on that one mission statement. And my suspicion is that all music schools have to work on their mission statements periodically, and that something like this would have an influence on that. And I think that's what we're all about. And from that step, then we have goals and objectives, and then we have actionable items that take place. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, is just influence the direction of the music schools in terms of how they characterize themselves and what they do.
Actually, Chris, that was part of my question. That's what I thought we came for. What I did not know about, but I think came up on day one, which muddies the waters for me somewhat, was the entry of the issue of NASM guideline. And then when I hear people talk about NASM and what role we think NASM should play, how this mission, our mission, would be infused into that organization or adopted by that organization, what the consequences might be for schools of music in terms of following then or being expected to follow our own recommendations. I was seeing this mission as being much more global, but I think I keep switching back and forth when I hear someone mention about accreditation. You would need to follow these. So where are we? Where are we with that?
We're certainly not doing this as a, well, let me say it this way. We are an independent venture that's been under the consultation of Dr. Hope from inception, but certainly an independent venture that has gotten independent financial support from the large stakeholders in the country and have provided us an opportunity to get feedback and suggestions from qualified experts. Just like I would hope something like this would affect the mission statement of a local school, I would hope that it would resonate among music administrators across the country and at some point in time influence, like we had a discussion about earlier, changes perhaps in NASM guidelines. But that's certainly not our goal, to have a direct influence on that guideline. We made the argument early on that, look, we don't feel as though music schools have the resources right now to do this particular, or to act on this particular should statement. And we want to support that. We want to help that. And so we're going to provide something to the schools so they have a minimum requirement. And I think of some very small rural schools that don't have any resources, you know. So we're going to give them something. Hey, that's great. But in the meantime, we're going to come up with some ideas for future directions, and look at all that's come out of this particular activity. But as a fundamental belief, if we as a group can put this statement out there, if we believe it, I think it'll have some impact, but not a direct,
Chris?
Yes.
I wonder if it would help to state to whom we're making this recommendation?
The world.
We recommend to the world. Okay. And then the other thing is, I'm hearing that there are many people out there that want some acknowledgement of all the wonderful things that music does. And I don't see I don't think it weakens the statement to add a phrase that acknowledges that in some manner.
Yeah, I don't either. And I hope that as people acquire this commentary, think about it, and hopefully believe it, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a change in the belief system. Do you believe it or not? Well, this group says, by virtue of that statement, that we believe it. And hopefully that'll influence the belief of others. If we get belief, then we'll get actionable steps. And just because they believe it doesn't mean that their missions in life have to change to diminish any positive aspects of being involved with music at all. Our mission isn't necessarily to advocate music. There's plenty of that going on. Our mission isn't here to articulate all the wonders of music. That's going on. Our mission isn't here to develop language specific to an organization. And MENC may have some statement that's different than NAJE, for instance. Or NATS may incorporate something like this into their language as an organization that's different. But we as a body here are at a point where do we want to acknowledge this belief system and project it out into the music world? Yeah.
You know, one thing that occurs to me, Chris, and audience, kind of along the lines of some of the recommendations in the mental health group about acknowledging strengths before criticizing weaknesses. But I just think clinically, that's what we do with clients all the time, is sort of empathize with what makes it hard for them and then try to challenge and confront the problem. So, you know, I think that adding the benefit, recognizing the benefit part, I agree. I don't think it weakens it, and it sounds like it would make people feel more comfortable around giving that message about the risks.
I agree with what Susan said. However, in terms of wording, and I know we're not going to come up with precise wording, it may be difficult to still have it all in one sentence if we include a statement that acknowledges the benefits of participation in music, because it sounds odd to me to say that schools of music need to recognize and respond to the benefits. Right?
In addition to
Yeah,
the
so I
risks,
think,
in addition to the benefits.
and so that's why we'll have to work out the wording. But when you're putting in contrasting,
Or despite the many benefits of...
While recognizing.
While recognizing.
While recognizing. I like that. Is Andy Krim around or available? He's gone? Can you type into here to change some of this language for us? Okay.
So why don't we, what if we just said, while recognizing the many benefits of
Yes.
music, blah, 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 recommend that?
And then also, I think there's agreement up here at the table that we should change cultural and societal to institutional.
It's known as the Manchester Amendment.
Chris, I'd also like to add, and I think it's good that we're maybe tinkering with the language, but there's also a difference between a single sentence that's going to go to certain constituencies to represent, and then all the other materials that are going to come out of this group that are already in our booklet, they're on the website, the brochures we're talking about. I mean, we're going to have lots of opportunities to represent a much more well-rounded, balanced thing, and this is a very particular one-sentence thing, and I still want to argue for balance, but it by itself doesn't represent everything we're going to be doing.
Then, as I've been taking notes, the remaining issue is a purer focus on risk reduction versus a broader focus on health promotion.
Yes, and I personally think that we have to be careful, because I don't believe the role of the music school primarily is to do things that are happening in other parts of the university. The university perhaps has a mission that we need to promote health and well-being.
And I would certainly agree from a college health perspective that the university should be promoting health and wellness for all students, whether they're music students or engineering or biology or anyone else. And at most schools, that's happening to one degree or another.
Well, also I think it's just this very practical way of thinking about that. If I'm about to go into something, I don't know what it is, maybe it's a ride at Six Flags, okay? I don't want the gatekeepers to tell me how to promote my health, okay? I want them to tell me about the risks.
But you're an engineer.
Go ahead.
And I think for a 5-minute ride, that's a 5-second set of instructions. For a lifetime career, it gets more complicated, and that's why I think we're going back and forth on this.
Whenever we try to change attitudes, that's a very tough thing, and I think that if we're overambitious, then we'll fail, or we may fail, and that when we want to change attitudes, again, we have to make it simple and obvious for the people whose attitudes we want to change. And in putting together that sentence, our group was just concerned that if we got too complicated and asked for too much, then we wouldn't get the most important thing. And that once we felt that we could change attitudes in the simple thing that was common sense, that downstream, of course, once you identify that there's depletion of the body and that there is prevention and ways to build the body back up through conditioning and proper posture and so forth, that you can promote health, that this was just a natural, this is a natural part of the process. But to really change attitudes and to get things in, we need to start simple.
I'm Charlotte Iosa from Shenandoah University in Winchester. I just wanted to say that we have always found, of course, that our students have to be healthy in order to function in the school. And we found that to be so important that we started some years ago including that statement in all of our syllabi for all classes, private lessons as well as ensembles, that it is the students' responsibility to maintain their health so that they can perform at an optimum level. So I should think somehow that fits in, because ultimately it will be the students' responsibility to accept what it is we're trying to teach them about these risks and then deal with them intelligently.
I'd like to speak on, just from being a music student,
the wording of the sentence with the word risks in it. Whenever I'm practicing in my practice room, I don't think, what are the issues with this, with playing, in this tiny room. I think, what kind of risk am I taking with my hearing by not having my earplugs in? It's that specific, that specificity that I think is important in this statement with the word risks in it. Because if we used issues or if we use a condition that is all-encompassing and it kind of waters down that the reality is that there is a risk of me having hearing damage or in playing the instrument incorrectly that I'm going to have some sort of tendinitis. And so I think we don't want to lose that, the fact that this is a reality.
It makes me think there's some language in psychology, in clinical psychology now, called therapy interfering behavior. This has nothing to do with the statement, but just Juan's point, where in a way, this would be like risk equals music interfering behavior.
Well, in fact, it should.
Yeah.
It should. We should have people interfered with.
No, but I mean, being at risk, puts people at risk of messing up their career, not being able to do their music, all this stuff. So I mean, in a way, it's a similar idea that you're interfering by doing things that are harmful to yourself. You interfere with what you're trying to do there, being a performer or whatever.
Okay.
Chris, I'm concerned about where we are, and also that the people who are proposing are only the people bold enough to walk up to the microphone, so you're not necessarily hearing, as a panel, representative ideas from the group. And I'm wondering if the panel would even go back to perhaps, Chris, what you said earlier, which was you take these ideas, you take these concerns, craft a statement on your own, because I think even if we come up with a statement and vote on it here, it may not be giving you all the kind of consensus that you might like to know. So I guess I'd like to know how best to proceed now from where we are.
Well, I think that we're doing pretty well. I would just encourage anybody here who's sitting there seething and has got something to say to come up. I mean, after 3 days of this, that's
Right.
your loss if you don't contribute. It's not our fault, and the mic is open, and we're going to stay here till, but anyway.
Get out there.
I believe this attitude that we're trying to get a hold of is vital. If we don't get a hold of it now, it's going to be, it won't have as much meat later. If I say I think this is what everybody was contributing to this statement, and this is my opinion now of it, versus, wait, we had a meeting, we discussed it, watched the video, and we had X percentage of people saying yes, this is what we want to put out. I think it's very important that we have something like this. As Dr. Meinke helped us understand the rationale for, this will provide us a basis in a foundational belief that will then hopefully move into the doing and the actionable steps. But I'd much rather have it dealt with now. Yes.
As a process statement, we may want to check in once in a while when we change the sentence to see if we like the sentence, because we actually have a new sentence up here, and it might be informative to know if that's better liked or worse liked than the previous sentence.
Can you, let's take a vote.
We've got some worriers too who are wondering, is this the only thing we're charged with this afternoon, or do we have like 19 or 42 other points that we're supposed to try to get to?
Well, can you imagine all those other things that are on the doing side of the equation, trying to deal with those without having a belief system intact? Again, it's sort of stepping, well, yeah, we should do this, but I don't really believe there's a risk. Well, what's the point? Let's deal with this in a sequential manner. We're aware, we've seen the evidence, we've heard the discussions, we've seen the clinical presentations of these maladies. We're aware, do we believe? I don't think we have the capability to alter this at this point. I don't know, Pam, can...
See, it's altered from,
Okay.
it's not the one we voted on before, is it? It's got institutional in there.
So let's just vote on this one here as maybe this is a change, it is a change in wording, so we're voting on the wording. Okay.
Except institutional.
HB, well, yeah, and the point was just made that the acronym spelled out might influence the reaction to this too. For health promotion in schools of music delegates, while acknowledging the many benefits of music, recommend that music schools accept their institutional responsibility to recognize and respond to health risks inherent in the participation in all aspects of music, including educating, learning, performing, and listening.
And previous means what was just on the screen.
Yes. You're voting on yeah. Somebody to know, vote no just because they like all this.
Right.
Yeah. Let's watch Chris try to deal with this.
Suspense is building.
I know you already put the statement up there, but I just thought of one word that might help. Adding the word potential health risks might be a little more positive than just saying health risks.
I got a
by saying
comment about that.
potential health risks.
I just think the word risk implies that it can occur or not occur. I believe that's part of the word. So
It's a probability.
In looking at the statement, the original statement that we just voted on, it just seems like just too many words. So I have an alternative. That's as my doctor advisor Chuck Schmidt would say, is more parsimonious. HPSM delegates recommend that music schools recognize and respond to the health risks inherent in the many aspects of musical participation, period.
I think we had a version was very similar to that. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Can we modify it that way? Let's try that.
Yeah, they can put another slide. Put another slide. Make up another slide. Don't modify it. Put another one there. Yeah.
Harry?
The risk of losing.
Well, I was looking at this statement, and then Dr. Chesky said we are going to recommend to the world, and as being international students, it's even the first statement was hard to understand for me. I mean, it took a while to understand, but if it's longer, it's more complicated. And then I think the simpler is the better. And also about the risks, if we put that the benefits thing, I think our job is to make people believe or do something here. So we need some strong words to warn people. And so I think using the health risk is very good idea.
crosstabs.
How about in all aspects of music participation, period? In all aspects of
Yeah.
music participation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the dialogue up here at the table is, yes, it's cleaner, but there is a diminished directness to the challenge associated with thinking about how we actually learn music. And we were really thinking about the educational process as something that's primary to this dialogue. Well, the risk is inherent in how we learn, right? I'm pointing to what's risky. So if I'm learning music, it's risky. Music education and participation? Can you put in education there? Go ahead. Just music? Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Does that mean if you listen to the Beatles record backwards, you're going to...
Only if it's really loud.
They can stop if they want.
I like very much the brevity of this statement, and I think it has a lot to commend it. I think that the shortness of this statement can also have the virtue that it leaves the room for the vast content area. When I think about the enormous value to the content that has been expressed here over the last 3 days, I think this will be actually our greatest contribution, to share this content rather than to refine a statement that is more directive and political and diplomatic or whatever. Let's focus on the content.
Okay, so in order to move forward, we'll take another vote. Let's vote on this particular version of our belief system statement.
Can you live with it?
We'll go back to that statement. Yeah. HPSM delegates recommend that music schools recognize and respond to health risks inherent in all aspects of music participation. See what happens. I don't have a vote. I'm going to go get 5 of these things.
CBS News projects. No.
I am, because I wasn't part of this group that wrote it. So yes, I am.
But how legitimate are these voting machines?
My pen didn't go through.
Ah, there's somebody back there with 7 machines.
They're looking for the remote controls in the hotel rooms.
Now, maybe just to expedite this, If it's a wording issue, raise your hand. If it's the essence of what we're trying to say, raise your hand. Yes, if you voted no, is it really still dealing with the wording? Or is it dealing with the essence of what we're trying to say? Okay, so it's more still the wording. Well, I'll take my boss's advisement, and let's move on to the content.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a second.
Pardon?
She's going to...
Yeah, okay.
The only reason I objected to one part of this was I think Elaine made a wonderful suggestion, including education, because participation can connotatively exclude education. And so I would include education. And then I would vote yes.
Yes.
So.
We really worked on that word, and we all were in agreement that we need to get that in there because I feel personally, very strongly, it is how we teach. What happens in the teaching, learning process that emanates in a lot of these issues later on when a kid gets to college and later on. Some of the biomechanics research that we've done at our university to characterize performance characteristics suggests that these characteristics, those that are creating the risk, are well established well before a student gets into college. They play the way they play based on how they were taught. It's the educational process that influences the risk directly, I believe. And that's why we felt as a group, and I think there's a consensus up here, that that's what we're trying to get at. It's how we teach.
My only issue with the one word was instead of recognize and respond was to identify and reduce, because I know when people go to ask for funding, well, people can respond by saying, well, okay, we're going to respond. We aren't going to fund you. I mean, that is a response. It may not be the one you want, but you got your response. And so if you give yourself a verb where you actually want them to reduce the risk, it gives a direction to the energy. And that was my issue with the wording.
But the expectation to reduce it is probably a dream, but just to acknowledge it. You know, a response is to tell a student that there's risk, and that may be a huge step to begin with. But if we can figure out how to actually reduce it at some point, you know, maybe years ahead, that would be great. But to charge the... But we're aware, we've identified a lot of this, and you know, that's what we've been hearing. We know. We don't need to, well, we still need to know more, but we know a lot. And now we're at a point, do we believe it to be, and therefore we'll respond to that belief. But to continue to identify more and more of this, yeah, definitely. And then, in fact, that's a type of response, I suppose.
I was wondering about your concern about learning and teaching, or particularly the how-to. It seems to me the how-to is part of the third step from knowing to believing to doing. And you have been very adamant before to keep them separate. What I like about this statement is that it goes beyond what happens in institutions. But institutions, music schools, can also let the public know that all aspects of music participation, be it the garage band or the rock, the country western dance club where I go to, has risks involved. And I think in a way music schools have to make themselves the advocates for music wherever it takes place. Whether they're being listened to is another issue, but it is our responsibility. So I would really suggest that we wait with the specifications of education until we come to the doing, just like we did before in previous suggestions, where also in the doing, I believe, will the therapy come back in, and other issues that were raised, which were very, very, very valid. But in light of the way you want to see it worded, and thought of in terms of this three-step approach. I think this is probably the best we can do at this point.
That, in large part, Hildegard, that's why we had the societal and cultural language in there, because we were also talking about our responsibility to educate, lay people, yeah. But that doesn't negate it, right? Yes, yes. I'm just agreeing with you, yeah. How was it worded before? You took responsibility. Yeah. Yeah, she's saying that there is, the word responsibility, to accept the responsibility, would make it stronger right now. It's out. It just says recognize. I agree. The stronger we can get it, the better. The dialogue up here at the front table is concerned with the lack of the responsibility term. Because it didn't have the responsibility?
Legal risk.
Actually, a good point.
I would kind of agree. I would kind of agree with that because it is asking them to recognize, and that's enough of a responsibility there.
Yeah, and I would also, say, yeah, I agree, in light of the fact that we don't know how to be responsible yet when it comes to changing the way we teach somebody how to play an instrument in order to lessen the risks. We really don't know yet, so it's hard to be responsible to that. Okay, well,
Chris,
go ahead.
excuse me, I just had one comment about the word recognize. I do like the inclusion of the term identify because I believe it is a more proactive term and you can act on that identification rather than simply recognizing what the problem is. I think it's a more logical flow there.
Is somebody managing the, can you change that word? Recognize to identify?
I can see her shaking her head now. The word identify would leave you open to, okay, what is your procedure for identifying risk?
Hmm.
And I like recognize because it implies that there's a body of knowledge out there that they just have to acknowledge the existence of. They don't, music schools don't have to generate their own data on this. They need to acknowledge that data exists. They need to look at the data, decide how it applies to their own environment, and respond appropriately.
That's a good point, too. So go ahead and change it back to recognize.
I think the legal concern is a valid one. However, if you actually talk to the attorneys, my suspicion is that they would say whether the music schools identify, recognize, respond, or fail to identify, recognize, or respond, the schools are frankly still open to litigation in areas of, I mean, the presentation on noise-induced hearing loss was a real, I guess, ear opener for me the other day, because the fact that we haven't had lawsuits, I just think it's a matter of time. So while it's perhaps laudable for us to be concerned with the language and whether NASM would adopt it, maybe they ought to be worried about that and adopt the language anyway, because those legal concerns are not going to go away.
Does the absence of the word responsibility alleviate the need to do outcomes assessment?
I think responding is responsible. It's a way of being responsible. I think recognizing is a way to be responsible at the point that we're at now.
Point of clarification, when the language says should in the NASM handbook, we're not responsible for assessment outcomes for accreditation, are we? So why are we talking about legal issues from this statement then? I'm confused. No, but I mean, what would it matter the way we worded it, because we have no legal weight.
No, Judy, it's sort of a what-if proposition.
I get it. Okay, thank you.
So we were under the opinion here that we would digest all the content that was presented and not try to come to some consensus about that. In fact, we wouldn't be able to present it in a way that you would be able to derive consensus in a timely manner. The only possibility to even look at the content area as a refined outcome of these presentations would be to review the student recommendations of the mental health group. And that has been endorsed fully and completely by the music education group and those up here on the panel, I believe. Other than that, the other working groups are tasked now to do what they were originally tasked to do, which is to get to that point. And I believe this process has given them a better roadmap to do that. And so, therefore, I don't think that we're here now in any level of capacity to actually address the specific content areas. If there's any problem with that or disagreement with that, please speak up now.
No.
Uh-oh.
Actually, I do disagree. Something that some of you may not know, the national meeting of NASM in November, Chris will be moderating a session for as much of the membership will attend, basically reporting on this conference. And that will be one of the first outcomes of what happens here for the larger membership of music schools. And I think that what is shared there, and Chris, you can remind me about who the other participants will be.
Dr. Rayburn will be there, and Dr. Hodges will be there.
So with all of the content and the idea that the goal from this is to produce the educational module that can be shared, that module has to be based on the content of what has happened in these 3 days, I think. And I think we may be farther along in that process than would be suggested, that we're not ready to go forward with that. There are many incontrovertible things that were presented as evidence that I think it would be very good if we can share sooner rather than later.
I've been thinking about this as well, and I think what we can do would be to at least collect the materials that have been presented here and just simply say, these are the materials that were presented here. We don't have to provide any consensus about them or endorsement of them in any way at this point. And part of what our concern is over the long run is that You know, there are a lot of things that we hear from time to time as recommendations, but they're not necessarily strongly supported by scientific research. There's very weak anecdotal support for certain kinds of things here and there. And I think as we evolve, there'll be sort of some process for taking things from here's some information we heard about to here's getting to something that's more endorsed or has been reviewed and critiqued and qualified in some way. So I think to achieve the goal of getting material out that everyone can individually evaluate and decide whether they want to use it at some point, right at this point, sort of have a disclaimer on it, we can make things available. I don't know if that makes sense. And that would include not only things that I think that you heard presented, but also all the little things we collected on the cards, okay? There's a lot of good ideas, I think, in here that relate not only to the topic areas we heard, but other sort of categories like implementation, okay, when we do get to the do. So to get us thinking about some ideas on that part, there's some good ideas here, and we'll be able to include that with that material set.
I do have a comment. I think that with respect to all of those materials, as I said in my little talk, I think you need to have a guideline and a standard for writing guidelines and standards, and that might be the first thing that has to be done. Here's how we're going to take this material. Here's how we're going to evaluate it. Here's who and how we're going to write down our final recommendation, and here's how we're going to have it reviewed and critiqued before we actually present it.
Perhaps, Mark, you could share with us how that process unfolded with the UCLA project?
Actually, the challenge we have now really reflects the challenge we had in alternative medicine, because in 1993, a study by Eisenberg at Harvard, who used to be at UCLA, demonstrated that 42% of people were using alternative medicine. And this really changed the agenda of Congress and medical doctors. No one knew that everyone was doing it. So we had to catch up. And that's kind of what's going on here, right? We have all this information and it's a catch-up game to get everyone to where we are. And the way that the medical profession handled it was that the accreditations of the medical schools and the organizations that regulated medical schools first put out a very general sentence in one of their main documents that really reflected this, something that was very general, a minimum standard that everyone could follow and start to change attitudes, and then move people from the attitudes to the skills, or to the do part. So then the next step was all these alternative curriculum pop up all over the country. And really that was the transition. The attitudes was kind of fostered by everything going on in society that was reflected in this piece by these regulators of medical education and the curriculum. And then all these people started doing. And usually what happened was, it wasn't someone saying to the dean of the medical school or the curriculum, this is what you had to do. It was usually people who had an interest, champions within the organizations, who said, wow, Dean, look at this document, and Dean of Medical Education. And it gave them support to do their projects. And then all these projects popped up all over the country, and then there was the problem, there are no standards. Everyone has their own heterogeneous curriculum. And now what happened was a consortium of the academic centers that have alternative medicine got together, 22 out of 126 of the medical schools, and put out competencies and knowledge, skills, and attitudes that all medical students, they recommended all medical students have these competencies before graduation. And that's all they put out. And this was heavily funded, a lot of people working, needed consensus. So really, what comes out is this user's guide, like Bill said, of the process that we used to do this, and then the competencies, the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that everyone can agree on, while giving each university the flexibility to accomplish these objectives in a way that best suits their resources. And then what this user's guide includes is a sample curriculum from all the 22 universities. And right now I see, we always want to go straight to the user's guide, but right now I see us, in 1998 when we had this one sentence in this very important document. And again, just like the document, it wasn't saying that all we need was alternative medicine. Just like this isn't just saying there's no risk without benefit. This was a little piece, one sentence within a big document that said how good medicine was and what great things we've done over the last 100 years with biomedicine. And that's really, I see really an analogy here. This is one sentence we're trying to stick in this huge document that says how great music is and what strides we've made. And then after we start to change attitudes, then we want to kind of distribute some curriculum, get things going, use educational research where you randomize groups and have outcomes with knowledge tests or behavior questionnaires, attitude surveys, and so forth, where you can really evaluate different programs. And then once we have different data and evidence on these different programs, then we can really start to put together, a standardized curriculum that every school needs. But I think we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves, and just from really studying the whole process of change in medicine, over the last 10 years in alternative medicine, where already 50% of the people are using it, I think this is a really important first step to just agree on a core minimum standard that's stuck into an important document that champions within their individual organizations can hang their hat on, develop their own curriculum, have some guidance from packaged curriculum that we offer and that perhaps we collect from other people to study these things, and then we can really get into the whole health promotion program and put everything together in a much firmer package. But right now, I think, we're still at, the very beginning steps.
Well, I'm getting some signals from the back of the room suggesting that we are nearing our allotted time in here, so we have to consider that. But I think in addition to what Mark had just said, it doesn't mean that we can't continue tomorrow and digest all that we have here and assume the recommendations of the working groups to come up with a deliverable for the music schools that we can share and keep developing as we believe that we could do before we started this exercise, and to make an attempt at capitalizing on all the content and things that have gone in here to start a user's guide manual as a suggestion for ways schools can advance this mission. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we can look forward to that, and again, I don't believe that we could attempt to derive consensus on each of the content areas. Does anybody up here believe? Yeah. But I don't think that that would minimize the effectiveness of all the work that's gone into that, the group efforts. And we certainly want to use that and develop this material. So anyway, if I, there's another question? Okay. Oh, maybe that question is being answered.
Well, for those of us who haven't been in on the planning and all of the research that you all have done, it seems to me that we need to separate out two separate mission statements, one being an evangelical approach to health promotion among musicians, whether it be community, music ed students, and then the other to serve as a lobbyist group for curriculum change. And that hasn't been made separate, at least in my mind, from what's been going on. And those might be very different or somewhat different mission statements. Now, see, in my mind, I think that they go hand in hand, because you can't address the evangelical mission until you change the curriculum to an extent. Maybe I'm wrong.
Anyway, that all seems to be on the doing side to me.
Yeah, it is.
So anyway, all I can say is thank you, thank you, thank you for everybody up here in the front and for all of you and all of the staff. Pam McFadden in the back, thank you for helping put this together, and hope to see you next time. Stand up, everybody. I feel like a conductor.